Switching gears now to a more immediate issue. All over Iran right now, the streets are filling up with protesters. They are demanding an end to the 47-year-old Islamic Republic. So could this be the long-awaited end of the terrorist regime? Joining me now is Alex Gray. He's former National Security Council Chief of Staff. Alex, good to see you. Thank you for being here. These, by the way, we should just mention the bravery of these protesters. They know what has happened in the past. The people in charge are barbaric. They kill people at the drop of a pin. And there are people being rounded up. There are at least one incident of somebody that was seen and captured on video being killed in one of these protests. So these people are very brave. And the president just came out with a Truth Social posting. He said, if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the U.S. will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. In what way will we be coming to their rescue? What do you think, Alex?
Well, Happy New Year, David. I think the president's looking at this situation the way he always does when he's dealing with foreign policy. What is the American national interest? And I think it's clear that one of our number one interest is keeping the Iranian Ayatollahs from continuing the war that they've been waging for 40 years in the Middle East. I don't necessarily think at the same time that means we need to be going in and trying to promote regime change or in some way trying to pick and choose what a future regime in Iran looks like. And one of the reasons I think President Trump is going to be seen as a transformative foreign policy president is he's a realist. He takes the world as it is. And I think he can, at one hand, say, we absolutely appreciate and respect these brave students and bus drivers and transit workers who are rising up in Iran. And at the same time, we can recognize that maybe there's not necessarily an immediate U.S. interest in going Iraq style or Afghanistan style and choosing what the next regime looks like. So I think the president's trying to balance these two things, and I think that it's a tough rope to walk, but I think he can get it right.
Well, even if we don't go in there, to use your phrase, which I don't think any American wants us to do, God knows it's complicated, but do the people there, I know they're upset enough to risk their life to go into the streets to protest, but are they ready for regime change? I mean, it's been 47 years. That's a long time for this regime to get their hooks in.
You know, one of the things I saw when I was in government, David, is that there's constantly a perception that the regime is weaker than it really is. The regime, as much as we detest it, as destabilizing as it has been, the regime has an extraordinary amount of security forces, an extraordinary amount of repression at its disposal, and it has consistently, over a long period of time, used those arms of repression to keep the people repressed. And I worry, David, that despite what we've seen today, we may be going down the exact same route that we've gone down before, where the regime ultimately sends the secret police into Tehran and is able to keep the students.
But it won't be the same as when it happened back in 2009 when Obama was in power, where he did zero. He did absolutely nothing to encourage, whether overtly or covertly, the protesters. I think there will be an attempt to at least somehow support them. I want to switch to something closer to home, though, and that is, of course, Venezuela, because I do think Venezuela is ready for a regime change, because that regime is despised by, I would say, at least 60–70% of the people there. They're just miserable there, despite the oil wealth that they have. Maduro now says he's ready to talk. Does anybody in the administration believe him?
Well, I don't think anyone believes them. Here's the thing, David. This is a very different situation from Iran, in my view, because Venezuela is a core national interest of the United States. They're shipping drugs directly into the United States. They're killing Americans every single day. They're in cahoots with China and Russia directly on our doorstep. And I think what the president has said here, he's basically doing the Abraham Lincoln Civil War Anaconda plan, where he is squeezing the Venezuelans, the Maduro regime, every which way. He's going after their energy supply. supplies. He's going after the boats that are their narcotics lifeline. He's doing covert action every single day inside of Venezuela that we won't know about for decades. And I think what we are on the precipice of folks in the regime itself looking around and saying it is no longer in my interest to allow Maduro to be in the leadership.
It's in their interest to stay alive, and they're not going to be staying alive if they're right next to this guy for much longer. I also got to say that I'm hoping that there's some contacts between the administration and the Cubans and the Nicaraguans, both of those peoples are suffering under communist dictatorships as well. In the case of one for over 60 years. So, I mean, there may be, if they simply couldn't survive, could they without Venezuelan oil?
I think that we are seeing, David, and you mentioned this in the previous segment, we are seeing the leftist regimes of the hemisphere beginning to topple one by one. We've already seen Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia. This is a windfall that's happening because of President Trump's leadership. The hemisphere has been transformed in 1 year. Think how much he can do in 3 more.
Absolutely. Alex, great to see you. Thank you so much.